The whiskey burned just right as I sat in my den at midnight, listening to my wife Caroline's voice drift through the open window like poison on the night air. 46 years old, and I'd finally learned the sound of betrayal. It's got this particular pitch, like fingernails on a chalkboard, but sweeter somehow, more personal. "Don't worry, he's clueless," Caroline was saying into her phone, her voice low but not nearly low enough. "It's like taking candy from a baby." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Richard Palmer, that's me. Built Palmer Construction from nothing but calloused hands and a willingness to work when other men were drinking beer and watching football. 23 years in this business, 15 married to the woman currently standing in my garden, talking about me like I was some kind of village idiot. I took another sip of Jameson and leaned back in my leather chair. The one good piece of furniture Caroline hadn't redecorated in her endless quest to turn our house into something from those magazines she read. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was sitting in the dark, spying on my own wife in my own backyard. "He works so late, he never pays attention to anything else," she continued, and I could hear the smile in her voice. The same smile she'd given me that morning when she kissed my cheek and told me to have a good day at the site. My construction company employed 47 people, owned equipment worth over $2 million, and had contracts lined up through next spring. Clueless, right. The back door opened with its familiar squeak, the one I'd been meaning to oil for months. Caroline tiptoed through the kitchen, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floors we'd installed 3 years ago. Anniversary present to ourselves, she'd called it then. She froze when she saw me in the den, her phone still glowing in her hand. "Richard, what are you doing up so late?" I swirled the whiskey in my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the lamplight. "Checking for raccoons. Thought I heard something rummaging around in the garden. You know how they like to get into the garbage." Her laugh came out forced, brittle. "Oh, that. I was just getting some air. Couldn't sleep." "Air's good for that." I stood up slowly, all 6'2" of me unfolding from the chair. Caroline took a step back, which was interesting. "Fresh air, especially, clears the head." She brushed past me toward the stairs, but in her hurry, she left her phone on the kitchen counter. Caroline Palmer, who guarded that phone like it contained state secrets, just walked away from it. I waited until I heard our bedroom door close before I picked it up. The screen was still unlocked. Modern technology. So helpful when your wife thinks you're too dumb to use it. The text messages were right there, conversations with someone named L that made my stomach turn and my hands shake with something that wasn't entirely anger. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same place?" "He's working late again. We'll have hours." "You're so much more exciting than him. Can't believe you're stuck with that boring old man." Boring old man. That boring old man had built everything she spent, bought everything she wore, and paid for every charity lunch she attended with her circle of vultures. I scrolled back further, finding weeks of messages, plans, intimate details that made me want to throw the phone through the window. But the worst part wasn't the affair itself. It was the contempt. The casual way they discussed me, like I was some obstacle to work around rather than a human being. The signature on the text told me everything I needed to know. Luis Rivera. 32 years old, former Army, worked for me for 3 years. Started as general labor, worked his way up to site foreman. I'd trusted him with keys to the equipment, access to the supply yards, even let him use the company truck for personal errands. Apparently those personal errands included my wife. I set the phone back exactly where Caroline had left it and poured myself another whiskey. The burning in my throat matched the burning in my chest, but at least the whiskey was honest about what it was doing to me. Sleep wasn't going to happen, so I spent the rest of the night in my den, planning. By the time the sun came up, I had the beginnings of an idea. By the time Caroline came downstairs in her silk robe, yawning and stretching like she'd slept like a baby, I had the skeleton of a plan. "Morning, honey," she said, kissing my cheek with lips that had been God knows where. "You're up early?" "Couldn't sleep. Big day at the Morrison site." She poured herself coffee from the pot I'd made an hour earlier and settled into her usual chair at the kitchen table. "Will you be late again tonight?" "Probably. You know how it is." "I do." She smiled that same smile from last night. "I'll probably have dinner with Mindy and the girls, that new place downtown." "Sounds nice. You have fun with that." After she went upstairs to get dressed, I called Jerry Martinez, my site manager and the closest thing I had to a best friend. Jerry was an ex-cop who'd left the force after 20 years and never looked back. He understood people, their motivations, their weaknesses. Jerry, I need a favor. Can you meet me at the office early, before the crew gets there? Sure, boss. Everything okay? Define okay. An hour later, I was sitting across from Jerry in my office trailer, watching his weathered face process what I'd told him. Jerry was 51, had seen everything the streets could throw at a man, but he was shaking his head like he couldn't quite believe it. Luis, are you sure? I showed him the screenshots I'd taken of Caroline's phone. Jerry read them in silence, his jaw getting tighter with each message. That son of a bitch. Richard, I'm sorry. This is... He trailed off, then looked at me with those sharp cop eyes. What do you want to do about it? I want to know everything. How long it's been going on, where they meet, who else knows about it. And I want evidence. Evidence for what? You filing for divorce? I leaned back in my chair, the same way I did when I was calculating the cost of a big job. Maybe, or maybe I just want to know exactly how stupid they think I am before I show them how wrong they are. Jerry grinned, and it wasn't a nice expression. Now you're talking my language. Ruth Henderson had been my secretary for 8 years, and in that time she'd developed an almost supernatural ability to know everything that happened in our little corner of Maine. 73 years old, sharp as a tack, and completely loyal to the company that had given her purpose after her husband died. She was also the town's unofficial information network. Ruth, I said, settling into the chair beside her desk with my morning coffee, what do you hear about Luis lately? She looked at me over her reading glasses, the same look she'd given her 5 children when they were trying to put something past her. What kind of thing are you asking about, Richard? The kind of thing you'd normally tell me to mind my own business about. Ruth set down her pen and folded her hands. Luis Rivera has been spending a lot of money lately. New clothes, taking someone to expensive restaurants in Portland. Someone saw him at that jewelry store on Exchange Street last week, looking at bracelets. My coffee suddenly tasted like ash. Someone? Someone who knows Luis doesn't make jewelry store money on a foreman's salary. She paused. Someone who also knows your wife has been wearing some very pretty new jewelry lately. I'd noticed the bracelet. Caroline had said it was a gift from her mother, which should have been my first clue since her mother hadn't given her anything but criticism in the 15 years I'd known her. There's something else, Ruth continued. I got a call yesterday from Peterson Supply. Luis has been ordering materials using our account, but the delivery addresses don't match any of our job sites. What kind of materials? Small stuff. Tools, hardware, some lumber. Nothing big enough to flag the main office, but enough to add up. She handed me a folder. I took the liberty of pulling the records. I flipped through the invoices, recognizing none of the addresses. Have you driven by any of these places? The one on Maple Street is Luis's apartment. The others... She shrugged. I was waiting to see if you wanted me to investigate further. I do, but carefully. Richard. Ruth's voice was gentle now, the way it got when she was about to say something I didn't want to hear. I've been married 48 years before my Tom passed. I know the signs. If you need someone to talk to, or if you need help with practical matters, I'm here. Practical matters? Lawyers. Private investigators. Whatever you need to protect yourself and your business. I looked at this woman who'd been more of a mother to me than my own, and felt something crack open in my chest. How long have you known? Suspected for about 6 months. Knew for sure last week when I saw them together at that motel on Route 1. They weren't exactly hiding. The motel on Route 1. The Pineview Inn, a place that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions. I'd driven past it thousands of times, never imagining my wife was inside with my employee. Ruth, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to be very discreet about it. Name it. I need to know everything about Luis's finances, bank accounts, credit cards, where he's spending money. And I need to know Caroline's schedule for the next few weeks. Who she's meeting, where she's going, what she's telling people. Ruth nodded slowly. And what are you going to do with that information? I'm going to remind them both that the boring old man isn't as stupid as they think. That afternoon, Jerry and I drove to the guest house behind our main house. Caroline had insisted we build it 3 years ago, said it would be perfect for her mother's visits or weekend guests. What she hadn't mentioned was that it would be perfect for entertaining her boyfriend while I was at work. The guest house was small but well appointed, bedroom, bathroom, kitchenette, and a sitting area with a view of the garden. I'd built it myself, working evenings and weekends, proud of the craftsmanship. Now it felt like I'd built a monument to my own stupidity. Where do you want to put the camera? Jerry asked, pulling a small device from his bag. Bedroom's too obvious. They'd spot it eventually. I looked around, thinking like the contractor I was. There, In the smoke detector above the sitting area. It'll catch the whole main room. Jerry nodded approvingly. Motion activated. Uploads to cloud storage. You'll be able to watch from your phone. I'm not sure I want to watch. You don't have to watch, but you need the evidence. He was right, of course. Whatever I decided to do about Caroline and Luis, I needed proof. In Maine, adultery might not matter much for divorce proceedings, but theft from my company was a different story entirely. While Jerry installed the camera, I walked through the guest house looking for signs of their affair. I found them everywhere once I knew what to look for. Wine glasses in the sink, unfamiliar toiletries in the bathroom, a man's watch on the nightstand that definitely wasn't mine. "Richard," Jerry's voice was tight. "Come look at this." He was standing in the bedroom closet, holding a small wooden box I'd never seen before. Inside were documents, bank statements, photocopies of company invoices, and a handwritten list in Caroline's neat script. "Equipment inventory," Jerry read, "tool values, key locations." He looked up at me. "This isn't just an affair, boss. They're cataloging your assets." I took the list from him, recognizing every item: power tools, equipment, even the locations where we stored materials overnight. They're planning to rob me. Looks like it. The question is whether they're planning to do it before or after Caroline divorces you. I thought about the text messages, the casual contempt, the way Caroline had been pushing me to update our wills lately. I think the divorce is just the opening act. That evening I sat in my den again, but this time I wasn't drinking whiskey. I was watching my phone, waiting for the motion sensor to trigger. Caroline had gone to dinner with the girls, and Luis had texted in sick with food poisoning. At 8:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with an alert. The camera showed Luis entering the guest house with a key, my key, the one I kept on a hook in the garage. He looked around nervously, then pulled out his phone. 10 minutes later, Caroline arrived. I watched them embrace, watched them laugh, watched Caroline pull out a bottle of wine like she was hosting a dinner party. They sat on the couch I'd built and talked animatedly about something I couldn't hear. Then Caroline pulled out a folder. Even through the grainy camera feed, I could see they were looking at documents, pointing at papers, making plans. Luis took photos of several pages with his phone. Caroline made notes on a legal pad. They weren't just having an affair, they were having a business meeting. I turned off the phone and walked to my garage, where I kept a bottle of bourbon for the really bad days. This qualified. Tomorrow, I decided, pouring 3 fingers of Kentucky's finest, I was going to start reminding people why you don't steal from Richard Palmer. The next morning, I was waiting in the parking lot when Luis arrived at the job site. He pulled up in his Honda Civic, the same car that had been in my driveway the night before, though he didn't know I knew that. "Morning, boss," he said, climbing out with that easy smile that had fooled me for 3 years. "Feeling better today. Must have been something I ate." "Yeah, food poisoning's rough. You should be more careful about where you eat." Something flickered in his eyes, but the smile stayed in place. "Definitely will be." I watched him walk toward the trailer where we kept the tools, noting the new boots, the expensive watch, the confidence that came from thinking you were smarter than everyone around you. Luis had always been ambitious, but I'd mistaken that ambition for work ethic rather than simple greed. At lunch, Jerry pulled me aside. "Ruth's been busy. You want the good news or the bad news first?" "Is any of it actually good?" Luis has been skimming materials for 6 months, selling them to a guy in Portland who doesn't ask questions. Small amounts, but it adds up to about $15,000. "And the bad news?" "Caroline's been meeting with a divorce lawyer, filed preliminary paperwork last week." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "How preliminary?" "Preliminary enough that she's already claiming you've been hiding assets and engaging in financial misconduct." The irony was so perfect it was almost funny. Almost. She's accusing me of what she's actually doing. Gets better. The lawyer is Nicole Patterson's husband. You know Nicole, right? One of Caroline's friends from the country club. I knew Nicole. Blonde, sharp-tongued, married to a man who specialized in high-asset divorces. The kind of woman who smiled at you during charity events while calculating how much your suit cost. So Caroline's been planning this for months. Looks like it. Ruth thinks the affair with Luis is just cover, a way to distract you while they build a case for financial misconduct. And if I'm convicted of stealing from my own company, Caroline gets everything in the divorce, and you get a few years in prison to think about it. I looked out at the construction site, at the crew working under the October sun, building something solid and real with their hands. These men trusted me to pay them on time, to keep the work coming, to treat them fairly. The idea that my wife and one of my own employees were planning to destroy all of it made me angrier than the affair itself. "Jerry, how long would it take you to document everything Luis has stolen?" Give me 2 days. Ruth's already started pulling records. Do it. And Jerry? I want you to be very thorough. That afternoon, I drove to the Pineview Inn. It was exactly what you'd expect from a place that advertised hourly rates available. Peeling paint, cracked asphalt, and a desk clerk who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I'm looking for information about one of your regular customers, I said, sliding a $100 bill across the counter. The clerk glanced around the empty lobby, then palmed the money. What kind of information? The kind that might be useful in a divorce proceeding. Room 237, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, sometimes Saturday mornings. Been going on for about 4 months. You keep records? We keep records of everything, insurance purposes. He grinned, showing teeth that had seen better decades. Of course, those records might get lost if someone wanted them to disappear. I want copies, not disappearance. That'll cost extra. An hour later, I was sitting in my truck with photocopies of registration cards, all signed by Luis Rivera, all showing the same pattern of visits. Caroline had been smart enough not to sign anything herself, but the timing matched her shopping trips and lunch dates perfectly. I drove home to find Caroline in the kitchen, preparing dinner like the devoted wife she'd never actually been. She was humming something under her breath, moving around the kitchen with the kind of contentment that came from thinking your plans were working perfectly. "Good day at work?" she asked, not looking up from the salad she was making. "Productive. Very productive." I opened the refrigerator and grabbed a beer. "Luis seems to be feeling better." "Luis?" "My foreman. The one who had food poisoning yesterday." "Oh, right. That's good." I watched her face, looking for tells, but Caroline had always been good at hiding her thoughts. It was one of the things that had attracted me to her 15 years ago, the sense that there were depths beneath the surface. Now I knew those depths were filled with contempt and calculation. "Caroline, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If you were going to steal from someone, how would you do it?" Her hand stilled on the tomato she was slicing. "What kind of question is that?" "Hypothetical. Say you wanted to take someone's money without them noticing. What would be the smartest way?" She turned to face me, and for just a moment, I saw something like fear in her eyes. "Richard, why are you asking me this?" "Just curious. You're smart about money, smarter than me. I was wondering how you'd approach the problem." "I wouldn't steal from anyone." "No, of course not. But if you had to, theoretically." She set down the knife and crossed her arms. "I think I'd make them think they were stealing from themselves, create evidence that made them look guilty while I looked like the victim." "That's very clever." "It's just theoretical, Richard." "Right. Theoretical." I finished my beer and headed for my den, leaving Caroline standing in the kitchen with an expression I'd never seen before, the look of someone who'd just realized the game had changed. That night, I waited until Caroline was asleep before checking the camera feed from the guest house. Empty, but the motion sensor had been triggered 3 times during the day. Someone had been there, moving around, possibly removing evidence. I called Jerry. "They're cleaning house," I told him. "We need to move faster." Ruth finished the financial audit. Luis has stolen over $20,000 in materials and equipment. We've got receipts, delivery records, everything. And Caroline? Harder to prove, but her fingerprints are all over the planning. Ruth found emails between Caroline and Nicole Patterson discussing asset protection strategies and evidence gathering. Evidence gathering. They've been building a case against you for months, Richard. Bank records, business expenses, anything they could use to make you look like you were embezzling from your own company. I thought about Caroline's question earlier, about how she'd steal from someone, make them think they were stealing from themselves. She'd been telling me exactly what she was doing. "Jerry, tomorrow I want you to call Detective Halloran. Tell him we've discovered employee theft and we want to file charges." "Against Luis?" "Against Luis. Let's see how smart they really are." Detective Mike Halloran was a thin man with tired eyes who'd been working financial crimes for 15 years. He sat across from me in my office trailer, flipping through the evidence Ruth had compiled, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. "This is pretty straightforward," he said finally. "Employee theft. Probably felony level, given the amounts involved. You want to press charges?" "I want to do whatever protects my business and my employees." "I'll need to interview Rivera, get his side of the story. You understand he'll probably try to implicate you, claim he was acting on orders, or that this was standard practice." "I understand. And your wife? Her name appears on several of these documents." I'd been dreading this question. "My wife has been involved with Luis. I think she was manipulated into helping him." Halloran's expression didn't change, but he made another note. "Manipulated how?" I think Louise convinced her that I was the one stealing from the company and that she was helping gather evidence against me. That's a pretty elaborate manipulation. Louise is a pretty elaborate guy. That afternoon, I watched from my office window as Halloran and a uniformed officer escorted Louise to their patrol car. Louise looked confused at first, then angry, then desperate as he realized what was happening. He kept looking toward the office trailer, probably hoping I'd come out and explain that this was all a mistake. I didn't. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Caroline's name on the caller ID. Richard, what's happening? Mindy just called and said she saw Louise being arrested at your job site. Employee theft. Turns out he's been stealing materials and equipment for months. Silence on the other end of the line, then. That's terrible. Are you sure? I'm sure. The police have all the evidence they need. But Louise seemed like such a nice young man. Yeah, he fooled me too. Another silence, longer this time. Will this affect the business? Not the business, but it might affect some other things. What do you mean? I mean, people who were working with Louise might find themselves in some trouble too. I hung up before she could respond. That evening, I was in my den when Caroline came home from what she'd claimed was a shopping trip, but which I knew was actually a frantic meeting with her lawyer. She looked pale and shaken. Her usual composure cracked around the edges. Richard, we need to talk. About what? About Louise, about the charges, about... She took a breath. About us. I set down my book and looked at her for the first time in months. She was still beautiful at 39, still the woman who turned heads when we walked into restaurants. But now I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the way she was measuring every word before she spoke. What about us, Caroline? I know you know. Know what? About Louise and me, about the affair. I'd been expecting this conversation, but it still hit like a punch to the gut. How long? 6 months? Richard, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to happen. It just... How long have you been planning to divorce me? She blinked, thrown off by the change of subject. What? The papers you filed with Patterson's office. How long have you been planning this? How did you... How long, Caroline? She sat down hard in the chair across from me, her careful composure finally cracking completely. 8 months. But Richard, you have to understand. 8 months. So the affair was part of the plan, not the cause of it. It wasn't like that. What was it like? She was crying now, but they were angry tears, frustrated tears, the tears of someone whose carefully laid plans were falling apart. You don't understand what it's like being married to you. You work all the time, you never talk to me, you treat me like I'm just another piece of furniture in your house. So you decided to steal from me. I never stole anything. I pulled out the folder Jerry had prepared, the one with photocopies of all the evidence we'd gathered. Caroline's handwriting on inventory lists, emails discussing asset protection, bank records showing suspicious transfers. You helped Louise steal from my company so you could claim I was embezzling in divorce court. You were going to send me to prison, Caroline. She stared at the documents, her face going white. That's not... We weren't going to let it go that far. We were just going to use it as leverage in the divorce. Leverage. To make sure I got a fair settlement. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. A fair settlement? You mean everything. You owe me, Richard. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of being ignored and taken for granted. You owe me something for that. I owe you what the law says I owe you. I don't owe you my freedom or my business or my reputation. She was really crying now, the kind of desperate sobbing that came from realizing you'd miscalculated badly. What are you going to do? I'm going to let the police handle Louise. As for you, I closed the folder and looked at her. That depends on how cooperative you want to be. Cooperative how? Louise is going to try to drag you down with him. He's going to claim you were the mastermind, that he was just following your orders. You could go to prison, Caroline. But if I cooperate with you? If you cooperate with me, we can handle this quietly. Divorce, fair division of assets, no criminal charges. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and I could see her calculating again, weighing her options. What do you want me to do? I want you to tell the police that Louise manipulated you, convinced you that I was stealing from the company, and asked you to help gather evidence. I want you to admit that you were having an affair, but claim that you were also being used. And in exchange? In exchange, you get to walk away from this marriage with your freedom and enough money to start over. She nodded slowly. Okay. Yes, I'll do that. Good. There's just one more thing. What? I smiled, and it wasn't a nice expression. I want you to understand that this isn't over between us. You tried to destroy me, Caroline. You tried to take everything I've worked for and send me to prison for crimes you committed. I'm letting you walk away because it's easier than destroying you, but don't mistake that for forgiveness. Richard, I'm not finished. You're going to leave this town, Caroline. You're going to take your settlement money, and you're going to disappear from my life completely. Because if I ever see you again, if you ever try to contact me or interfere with my business or spread lies about me, I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. You're not the man I married. No, I'm not. The man you married was stupid enough to trust you. Consider this my graduation. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my office when Ruth knocked on the door. She had that look on her face that meant she was about to deliver news I wouldn't like. Luis made bail, she said without preamble. I figured he would eventually. He's been calling around town, telling people that you framed him, that Caroline was innocent, that this whole thing is your revenge for the affair. I leaned back in my chair. Anyone believing him? Some people. You know how this town loves gossip. I did know. In a place this small, reputation was everything, and Luis was smart enough to understand that. If he could convince enough people that I was the real criminal, it might create reasonable doubt in court. There's something else, Ruth continued. Caroline hasn't left town. That got my attention. What do you mean? I mean she's still here, still living in the house, still meeting with her friends, still acting like nothing happened. She agreed to leave. Well, she changed her mind. Word is she's planning to fight the divorce, claim you coerced her into admitting to things she didn't do. I felt that familiar anger building in my chest, the same rage that had been simmering for weeks. Caroline had played me for a fool once, and now she was trying to do it again. Ruth, I need you to make some phone calls. What kind of calls? The kind that remind people in this town exactly who they're dealing with. That evening, I drove to Murphy's Pub, the kind of blue-collar bar where construction workers and mechanics went to drink beer and complain about their bosses. It was also the kind of place where news traveled fast and opinions were formed over whiskey and shared grievances. I found exactly who I was looking for at the end of the bar. Tommy Morrison, whose crew had been working on the site where Luis was arrested, and Pete Kowalski, who'd had his own run-in with employee theft a few years back. Richard, Tommy called out when he saw me. Heard you had some excitement at the job site. You could say that. I ordered a beer and settled onto the stool next to them. Turns out Luis had been stealing from me for months. No shit? Pete shook his head. You never can tell with people. That's the truth. What really gets me is how he tried to make it look like I was the one stealing. How's that work? I gave them the simplified version. Employee creates false evidence, manipulates boss's wife, tries to frame boss for his own crimes. It was a story that would resonate with every working man in the bar, the idea of some smooth-talking con artist trying to destroy an honest businessman. And your wife fell for it? Tommy asked. My wife fell for him. The rest was just details. By the time I left Murphy's, half the bar had heard the story. By the next morning, it would be all over town. Luis could tell his version all he wanted, but he'd be fighting an uphill battle against the narrative I'd just planted. The next phase of my plan required a more delicate touch. I called Detective Halloran and asked him to meet me for coffee. We sat in a booth at Rosie's Diner, the kind of place where conversations could be private if you kept your voice down. I'm worried about my wife, I told him. Worried how? I think Luis is pressuring her to change her story. She's been acting strange since he made bail, nervous, looking over her shoulder all the time. Halloran stirred his coffee thoughtfully. You think he's threatening her? I think he knows she's the key witness against him, and he's desperate. Has she said anything specific? She's scared to say anything, but yesterday I found her crying in the kitchen, and when I asked what was wrong, she just said she was afraid Luis was going to hurt her. It was a lie, of course. Caroline wasn't afraid of Luis. She was afraid of me. But Halloran didn't need to know that. I could have a patrol car drive by your house a few times, make sure everything's okay. I'd appreciate that. The patrol car visits serve two purposes. They reinforced the idea that Caroline was a victim rather than a co-conspirator, and they reminded everyone in the neighborhood that the Palmer house was at the center of a criminal investigation. Within days, Caroline found herself increasingly isolated. Her friends from the country club stopped returning her calls. The charity organizations she'd worked with suddenly didn't need her help anymore. Even the grocery store clerks treated her with the kind of polite distance reserved for people under suspicion. I watched it all from my office, getting reports from Ruth about Caroline's growing desperation. She'd tried calling me several times, but I'd let the calls go to voicemail. Her messages grew more frantic with each passing day. Finally, she showed up at the job site. I was reviewing blueprints with Jerry when I saw her car pull into the parking area. She got out slowly, looking around nervously at the workers who stopped what they were doing to stare at her. "Boss," Jerry said quietly, "you want me to handle this?" "No, let her come." Caroline walked to the trailer like she was approaching a firing squad. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by the hunched shoulders and careful steps of someone who knew they were unwelcome. She knocked on the door. "Come in." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Richard, we need to talk." "I'm listening." "This has gone too far. The whole town is treating me like I'm some kind of criminal." "Are you?" "You know I'm not. I made mistakes, yes, but I never meant for anyone to get hurt." I set down my pen and looked at her. She'd lost weight in the past few weeks, and there were dark circles under her eyes. The stress was eating at her, just like I'd planned. "What do you want, Caroline?" "I want this to stop. I want to take the deal you offered me before." "That deal expired when you decided to stay in town and fight the divorce." I changed my mind. "So did I." She sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to understand what you did to me. You didn't just have an affair, Caroline. You didn't just decide you wanted a divorce. You tried to destroy me completely. You were going to send me to prison for crimes you committed." "I know, and I'm sorry." "You're not sorry. You're scared. There's a difference." She was crying again, but this time the tears looked real. "Please, Richard, I'll do anything you want. I'll leave town. I'll never contact you again. I'll sign whatever papers you want me to sign. Just make this stop." I pretended to consider her offer, letting the silence stretch until she was squirming in her chair. "There is one thing you can do for me." "Anything." "I want you to tell the truth, all of it. I want you to admit publicly that you and Luis planned this together, that you were going to frame me, that the whole thing was your idea from the beginning." "But if I do that, I'll go to prison." "Maybe, or maybe the prosecutor will offer you a deal in exchange for your testimony against Luis." "And if they don't?" I shrugged. "Then you'll go to prison. But at least you'll go to prison for something you actually did." She stared at me like I was a stranger. "You really hate me, don't you?" "No, Caroline, I don't hate you. Hate requires caring about someone, and I don't care about you at all anymore. You're just a problem that needs to be solved." She left without saying another word. 2 days later, Caroline Palmer walked into the district attorney's office and confessed to conspiracy to commit fraud, theft, and perjury. In exchange for her full cooperation and testimony against Luis Rivera, she received a suspended sentence and 5 years of probation. Luis Rivera was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 3 years in state prison. The divorce was finalized a month later. Caroline received exactly what Maine law entitled her to, half of our marital assets, minus the amount she'd helped steal from my company. After legal fees and restitution, she walked away with about $30,000 and a criminal record. I kept the house, the business, and my reputation. 6 months after the trial, I was sitting in my den with a glass of whiskey, reading a letter Ruth had brought me. It was from Caroline, postmarked from somewhere in Florida. "I know you'll probably throw this away without reading it," she wrote, "but I wanted you to know that I understand now what I put you through. I destroyed our marriage because I was selfish and bored and stupid, but that wasn't enough for me. I had to try to destroy you too, and I can't even explain why. Maybe because it was easier than admitting I was the problem. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't expect you to care. But I am sorry. For whatever that's worth." I read the letter twice, then walked to the fireplace and dropped it into the flames. Some apologies come too late to matter. I poured myself another whiskey and looked around the house that was finally completely mine. Tomorrow I had 3 job sites to visit, payroll to review, and a business to run. The work would go on, the way it always had, the way it always would. Richard Palmer, the boring old man who was too stupid to notice when his wife was cheating on him. Except I wasn't that man anymore, and I never would be again.